Imagine my dark-haired parents' surprise when my bright white head appeared on that stormy morning in May of 1960.
My name is Rob McCrill. I'm 64 years old. I live in Australia and I was born with low vision and albinism. This is my story. In 1983, I created a short audio documentary about my low vision and albinism. I made it on an audio cassette and shared it among my friends and family. In the year 2000, I created a web page to do the same thing, but this time I stepped out into the internet. It's now 2024, and once again, I'm sharing my story. I'm ticking off two bucket list items. The first is I've always wanted to make a film, and the second is I want to tell my story using film. Now, the internet is a huge place, and making this film has led to soul searching, and a few times at least, I've wondered whether it's a good idea, whether I'm leaving myself vulnerable, exposing myself, taking a risk. I've decided that it's a risk worth taking.
All people with albinism are vastly different. Although we share from a cluster of common characteristics, we all have our own unique experiences, strengths, weaknesses, life goals, and we come from different cultures. And even our common physical characteristics vary from person to person. So, if you've only ever met one person with albinism, you've only ever met one person with albinism.
Albinism is a rare condition that is characterised by either a partial or a total lack of pigment in hair, eyes, skin, feathers and fur. It mostly comes with vision problems, and people with albinism are often, or mostly, susceptible to the sun or strong light. They're photophobic in their eyes and vulnerable to sunburn. It's a rare condition. It occurs everywhere. It occurs in every country all over the world, and it usually happens with a frequency of between 1 in 17,000 and 1 in 20,000. So we are a rare breed, indeed. There are 5 important things that I have learned about my particular type of albinism. Now, my particular albinism is called oculocutaneous albinism. Now, I've written these 5 points on my fingers so that I don't forget. The first one is that albinism does not have a cure. It's a permanent condition. The second point is that albinism is not contagious. It's a genetic condition. The third point is that albinism does not deteriorate or get worse over time. It's a static and stable condition. The fourth point is that albinism is not life-limiting. And of course, the fifth point is that even though we have a range of associated eye problems and sensitive skin, there are no other major medical problems associated with albinism. The population of Australia is 26 million, give or take. Now that means if albinism occurs with a frequency of 1 in 20,000, that there should be, give or take, about 1,300 people living in Australia with albinism. Now that's quite a small number given such a big population, and it highlights to me how rare the condition is. Hi to the 1,300 people in Australia living with albinism. I'm sitting here with the DNA tower over my right shoulder behind me, and that is a fitting place to be sitting here to be talking about albinism as a genetic condition, a rare genetic condition. Now, I know nothing about genetics. I know enough to know that albinism is passed on, inherited from both parents to the person affected. And I know it's a recessive gene. I don't understand what that means. Albinism isn't a negative thing. It's just another option, another version of reality, just another way of being. Albinism comes with a range of eye and vision problems, and not everyone's affected in the same way. We all have our unique take on albinism, our own unique brand. In my case, I have, starting with the retina, the back of the eye, which is like the sensor of a digital camera. We have these little rods and cones that are like the pixels on a sensor, and they gather and form the image from the lens, just like a camera. For people with albinism, or for me, with my brand of albinism, the centre part of the retina is called the macula, and that's where there's a concentration of rods and cones, and that's where we typically look closely, straight on at things when we want to see fine detail. Well, with me, my macula is reduced, which adds to my overall low vision. I have a thing called nystagmus, which has been a curiosity for people all throughout my life, and it's the rapid back and forward movement, uncontrollable movement of my eye. And I've noticed that over the years, as I've gotten older, it's less pronounced, but it's there. I also have astigmatism. A lot of people without albinism have astigmatism, and that's where the shape of the eye, particularly the front of the eye, is out of shape. As my daughter described it, it's like having an eye shaped like a football rather than a basketball, and that adds to low vision by causing blurry vision. Now, as you can see, the sum total of all of these things in combination leads to significant low vision. And I have reduced visual acuity, which means I have trouble seeing fine detail. I have very poor depth perception, which means I'm no good at ball games. And I have both long and short-sightedness. And as my ophthalmologist noted recently when I asked him about that, he said, look, you're off the scale with long-sightedness and short-sightedness. The A word.
About 6 a.m. and thundering and lightning, and so that was a bit of an omen, Rob. Well, I'd been through a really hard experience, and the relief, was astonishing. And I saw I had a son, and then they gave me the baby to hold, and it was so much like my dad. And in my pregnancy, something had told me that you were going to be like my dad. It was something, a knowledge I had. So I looked at you and I thought, you were so much like him. And I had a photo of my father and his brother when they were babies, these white-haired babies. They were fairly dark men, Dad was 35 when I was born, and he had dark hair and suntan, or, you know, dark, sort of well-coloured and freckled. But they'd started off with these little blondies. So I thought, oh, there it is, he's a blondie. So they took you away after I met you. I think they must have talked about it in the hospital, of course, and I don't sort of remember seeing my doctor. So whether the nurses sort of said something to me, or I think somebody said you had blue eyes, but there was a light ring between the iris and the pupil. And then, yeah, it was a long time ago, so I don't remember it too clearly. I sort of wondered, as your little tyke, but you did everything and played outside and, you know, it was, no, I don't think I ever had any trouble with you. But I sort of wondered, and anyhow, we went to PMH and Princess Margaret Hospital for kids and saw Dr. Yates. And I think I don't know if I went every month or every 6 months, and we'd go along, and I had to get up early and get on the bus and get there, and, and then I'd come home, your dad would come home and say, well, what did the doctor say? And I'd say, oh, no, nothing, not much. But anyhow, when you were, just before you were ready to start school, I went along to your appointment, and Dr. Yates said, oh, this one's to Thomas Street School to visually impaired kids. And I was glad, yeah. I knew that because nobody had mentioned it. He just, you know, that was what he did. He watched you and realised, and you went there and had a good teacher and learnt very well. Mrs. King, she was amazing at what she did.
I started in year 1 in 1966. Previous year I went to kindy, close to home, and Mum used to walk me from home to the Bentley Community Kindy 2 or 3 times a week. And I remember us going through, the suburbs are still being developed, and it was a massive tract of land, virgin land that hadn't been built on yet. And she and I would walk, feeling quite small, through the big trees and the sand dunes towards kindy. I went to Thomas Street Primary School. Now, back in the day, back in the 60s, the norm was to stream kids off into special schools. Kids with any sort of disabilities went to special schools, and I was no exception. My brothers went to their local primary schools in the suburb of Wilson, where we lived, and then on to their local high school, which was Bentley Senior High, which is where I went ultimately. Grade 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7 at Thomas Street Primary. Thomas Street was a regular school in inner city Perth, and it had 2 classes for kids with low vision. So we had our 2 classes. They were small classes. Each class had about 17 kids. The first class had grades 1, 2 and 3, all mixed in little clusters in their grades. And the second class was grade 4, 5, 6 and 7. So we were with the same kids in the same class for 7 years. We had the same teacher for the first 3 years, and then another teacher for 4, 5, 6 and 7. So it was close-knit, and it was very supported and supportive. Interesting thing about the Thomas Street Primary School was most schools back then were separated with a white line. Boys' side, girls' side. Girls' toilets, girls' lunchroom, boys' toilets, boys' lunchroom, different playing areas. and the school rules were that there was no crossover. Our school had a second white line painted. We had the boys' side, the girls' side for the local kids, and we had a little area tucked in near the main road for the visually impaired kids, boys and girls mixed in. So we were discouraged from crossing over our second line, discouraged from mixing with the other kids. So we spent 7 years cocooned with people who were similar to us. Now, interestingly enough, in the long term, that caused problems. In the short term, it was great because we were able to walk up to the board in clumps and get close to see the work on the board. We had work enlarged. We were encouraged to use our magnifying glasses and any visual aids that we had, and we were looked after. It was an interesting experience because we lived in Wilson, which was, about 12 kilometres out of the city. It's a suburb in the south of Perth. And all of the kids who had visual impairments came from all over the metropolitan area. We had 2 buses, our own buses, a bus to pick up the kids from the north, a bus to pick up the kids from the south. So that was a lot of travelling in the morning. I would be at the bus stop down the bottom of my hill every morning, even from day 1 or day 2 of grade 1 right through to the end of year 7. At 7 a.m, the bus would come by and pick me up. It would wind its way through the southern suburbs and arrive at the primary school in Subiaco at 9 o'clock. 2 hours travel in the morning. We'd finish school at 3 p.m, hop on the bus, wind our way back, and I would get off the bus at just around or just after 5 p.m. That's 4 hours a day of travelling, and I did it. It was normal to me. It was normal. Interesting experience. Segregated schools and special schools were the thinking at the time. And as I said, in the short term, it was helpful, but it came with some long-term problems.
Yeah, well, you're very good. You didn't put on any tantrums or cry. You went ahead. You like doing things, Rob. You were very active. So you used to have to be down at the Manning Road where the bus went through on his round, picking up the kids. I think I had to be there at 7 a.m. So down we'd go, and then the bus would bring you home. And I think he dropped you out the front of their house. So it was hard for you because it was a long day, but it wasn't any inconvenient for me. And you come on well there. Yeah. Oh, you come on well at kindy too. For some reason you could do all the puzzles with one hand behind your back. And that amazed the kindy teacher.
I finished primary school at the end of 1972. I remember a group of us, year 7s, sitting in a circle on the lovely lawn underneath the 4 Norfolk Island pines at the front of our school, and we were all kind of excitedly wondering about the new life that we were all embarking on as teenagers and heading off to first year high. I realised as I was sitting there that all of these kids that I'd spent the last 7 years with were all going to scatter in all 4 directions of the metro area. And I was going to be the only kid in that school, in that class, who was heading off to Bentley Senior High. I started to feel a bit nervous about the whole thing as I was thinking that. Maybe high school's going to be okay. And my parents and grandparents also reassured me that kids at high school everyone's more mature, so the expectations are all going to be different, so you'll be okay. I started high school in 1973. Having left the supportive environment of primary school, where I did quite well academically, when I went to high school, I went to my mainstream local high school at Bentley Senior High School, and that's when things radically changed, and they changed for the worst. It was as if I was taken out of that supported environment and just dropped into no man's land. There was no support. There was constant and huge barriers. I sat in the front row, but I could never see the blackboard. And to this day, I have no clue what algebra is. And I found myself plummeting academically, and I was 13, 14, 15, and I didn't have a strong voice to say, I need some help. I need these gaps filled. So it was a disaster. Of course, at the time, going to high school clashed with adolescence, and I was painfully shy and awkward. I'd come to school with a shock of unmanageable bright white hair, thick glasses, using a magnifying glass to read my work, fair skin, and I was an albino. And I was eaten alive. I didn't have a whole lot of support from my family, and I had no one coming in to help me, and I just was miserable for 3 years. I was teased, called names, taunted, bullied. But the worst thing of all from that experience was being excluded and relegated to the margins of the school. And that was the worst part of it. And I just wanted to connect with people. I just presented as this albino with thick glasses. I still wear thick glasses, and I'm still self-conscious about how they make your eyes look bigger. And I still feel uncomfortable about using a magnifying glass on the train. Academically, I did badly. Socially, I was persona non grata.
Well, of course, you had to go down the path with your vision, but I'm very grateful for the vision you had when you got into glasses, and you're able to manage and do your schooling, and you had to work harder, of course, but you did, and that was your life too. The rest of your life you've been probably having to work harder, and you've sort of been fearless and energetic, and you've done good. You're a physically strong kid, never had, any much in the way of, or you never had allergies, or you had to watch the sun, of course. And I think when you were little, the sunscreen had just come out, so that was lucky. So you always had that. But you were, no asthma or anything. It was just your glasses. And now and again, when you were little, you'd lose a pair, and we'd have to go and buy some new ones. That was a bit of a strain on the budget. Rob always rode a bike from the time he could ride a bike around the streets to school, not to Thomas Street, but to high school. What else did he do? He was always building something or doing something. There was nothing much that he couldn't, get around. He used to go out the back and run around the picket fence on the rail. Pickets used to be nailed to a rail, and I remember saying to a nurse, I think she was, "Oh my God, but he runs around the rail and the pickets have got sharp." And she said, "Oh, you're lucky, aren't you?"
I grew up in a suburb called Wilson. This is Wilson. Now, what sets Wilson apart from a lot of other suburbs is that we've got the beautiful Canning River flowing through us. So when I was a kid, this was perfection for me because I was able to explore so many parts of the river and the river foreshore, and it made it a pretty exciting and adventurous place to live and to grow up. My time here at Bentley Senior High School was a living hell. It was a very miserable 3 years for me. But there was one standout positive experience that happened in 1974. 1974, I was in second year, year 9, or second year as we used to call it back in the old days. And we were all streamed into different grades of classes according to our need and our abilities. We had basic, elementary, intermediate and advanced. And in second year, I found myself in one of the basic English classes. Well, the first couple of periods we had, were a disaster. The kids were totally uninterested and they were disruptive and unsettled. And it was really looking like it was going to be a failure. Then our teacher, Mr. Pearce, did a pretty special thing. He pushed aside the syllabus and pulled out a novel. And the novel was The Sun on the Stubble by South Australian author Colin Tearley, who also wrote Bluefin and Storm Boy. And he started reading to us. And period after period, he would read more of the novel to us. I didn't miss a single class. I was captivated. And so were the others in the class, because it was just quiet and focus on Mr. Pearce reading this novel about a kid called Bruno Untermeyer Gunther, I remember his name. B-U-G, Bugsy was his nickname, so he had his own share of his own experience with awkwardness and teenage angst. We were all the same age. I guess we could relate to the character. That was really one of the rare experiences from high school for me where the education worked. I'd like to meet Mr. Pearce again one day and say to him, thank you for English in Year 9 in 1974.
I needed a foundation, I needed a framework, I needed an understanding. But what I had was just gaps in my knowledge and incredible feelings of shame and feelings of being defective, which, and I didn't have anybody to go to. I had no mentors or anybody who understood what I was going through or could provide help to fill in the gaps for me as a kid. I think most people around us didn't have much of a clue either. I certainly believe that at high school, their understanding of the whole experience of having a disability was pretty much zero. Here I was, one of 4 kids from my 2 dark-haired parents, and I was white, and I had low vision. Now, during the day, my brothers all went off to the local primary school, as all other kids in our neighbourhood did, which set them up for connections when they went to high school. I often wonder about how they felt about me going to Thomas Street Primary School to the special class. That must have been mysterious for them, heading off on that 2-hour, 4-hour round trip on the bus and going to this class in the inner city that they'd never even seen. And I'd never seen their primary schools either. So already we were traipsing different paths.
When I was in my early teens, I was home with my brothers, my younger brothers. I think it was a day on the weekend, and Mum and Dad were out, and my brother had a friend over. And out of the blue, I think he was trying to impress his friend, but he started calling me a name. He called me Blondie Bat. And on 2 levels, the first level I was hurt and embarrassed, and on the second level I thought, he's got a brother who has albinism. He should have had his finger on the pulse and had access to the full list of cool names. Even though Blondie Bat, I'll give him points for originality. I've never heard it before, never heard it since. It was a pretty crappy name. So here's a list of names that have been hurled at me throughout the years. Let's have a look at the list here. Casper the friendly ghost. That's a pretty common one. We've got Whitey, unimaginative and harmless, but another name still the same. Albi. I got a job after I finished school at a local bakery, and like the rest of the young kids that worked there, I was kind of teased and pushed down to the bottom of the rung, and they all nicknamed me Albi, and that was embarrassing. I would have thought that the adult world was more mature, but I was wrong. So Albi. Witchetty grub. Now, witchetty grub is uniquely Australian. A witchetty grub is so big, it's a white grub that lives in the dark hollows and recesses of trees, and apparently if they're barbecued, they taste pretty good. But witchetty grub, they're also sensitive to light, which is probably why it was chosen for me. Milky, another harmless but still hurtful one, nonetheless. During the 70s, one of our chocolate manufacturers in Australia manufactured a white chocolate, and they had a character called Albert the albino rhino, so I copped that one for about 18 months. Ghost boy. Well, we have a bit of a stereotype attached to us of the supernatural, so Casper the friendly ghost and Ghost boy are kind of part of that. Vampire, also another one that's linked to our supernatural stereotype. Snowball, another harmless one, but when people wanted to be really mean to me, they'd call me Snowballs, and that was embarrassing and hurtful. Oh, and of course, last but not least, when people just wanted to be plain mean, and when they were unimaginative, they would just call me albino. So there we go, there's some names. So Blondie Bat, levelled at me by my brother. Like I said, a couple of points for originality, but 0 points for impact. It's a pretty lame one. In 1990, I heard on the grapevine that there was going to be a school reunion for the kids from Bentley Senior High School. Now, this was a special one because it was 15 years anniversary of me leaving school, and it was focused on the kids who were born in 1960, my cohort, and for me that was the class of 1975. I went along. I was there mostly out of my strong curiosity. I realised early into the evening that I had a slim connection with the school and with the kids, and I got on with the night. At about the halfway mark, something odd happened. A bloke came up to me who I didn't recognise, and I didn't recognise him when he introduced himself, didn't recognise his name, and during our brief conversation he said, "Robert, I'd heard that you'd been very sick." Well, I corrected him and I thought, fair enough, it's been 15 years. A mistake. So I got on with the night. Toward the end of the evening, another bloke came up and made himself known to me. This bloke I knew, I recognised him. His name was Patrick, and he was one of the team members from my squad of bullies at high school. And as we were having our brief conversation, he said to me, "Robert, I'd heard that you'd been very sick and that you died." Well, I was taken aback, and I shook my head a little later on, as I shake my head now, and I think to myself, what myths and misconception were floating around about my low vision and albinism. That was a very strange experience. Probably the biggest barrier that I experience linked to my low vision is with spontaneous and independent transport. I live in Perth, which is a big city of sprawling suburbia. From its northernmost tip to its southernmost tip along the Indian Ocean coast, it spans 150 kilometres. We have a comprehensive public transport system, but if I need to get somewhere at short notice, it tends to fall a bit short and cause some frustration. Recently, in November of 2023, I realised how delicate the balance was of my public transport network. The rail line that travels past our house and takes me into the city, which is a major artery of my public transport network, closed overnight for about 2 years. Reason being, they were raising the line to take away major works, to take away the level crossings and improve the traffic flow. Great idea. But I was forced to have to walk longer distance in the heat, in the November heat, to replacement buses. The alternative was slower and just pretty frustrating, and it made me realise how much of a delicate balance using public transport can be. Lisa has a car, so our family transport needs are beautifully met. I use Ubers, and our state government provides half-price taxi fares to me, and that is brilliant. But the Uber and taxi option is still an expensive one. When I was younger, I used to ride a push bike, a bicycle, and I love the idea of riding an e-scooter, but I realise now at this stage of my life that they're both dangerous options, very dangerous options. I don't know what I was thinking when I was younger riding a bike, how much of a risk I was taking. So public transport, getting around, using public transport, and trying to sort of get to places where I need to get and where I want to get, that is my, and continues to be, my number one barrier. Another barrier that I experience day to day, and sometimes it feels like hour to hour and even minute to minute, is missing important visual cues. I'll give you a big example. Where I work, we have name badges. And the name badges identify us as staff, and there are hundreds of us, so it helps us to identify who we are when we're walking back and forward through the many corridors of the hospital. I know a lot of people because I've been working there for over 20 years, and a lot of people know me. And they'll go, "Hi, Rob," as they walk past me in the corridor. And I'll go, in a lot of cases, "Hi." I'll feel rude that I haven't been able to acknowledge them by name. And that's important to me because acknowledging someone by name is really important, I think. It honours people, and I feel rude not being able to do that. And the reason I do that or don't do that is because I can't see their name. Even people that I've known for years and years, not well, but from a distance, I still haven't connected their name to their face. So it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. When I'm walking down the street around where we live, in our shopping area and our cafe strip, someone from across the road will wave at me and yell out, "Hey, Rob." And I'll be like, first up, trying to scan where the person and the voice is coming from. And then I'll realise someone's saying hello to me, but I won't be able to say, "Hi, insert name here," because I don't know who it is. And sometimes people will drive past and they'll toot or they'll yell out of their window, "Hi, Rob," but I'll not be able to respond. And I wonder, do they think I'm unfriendly? I don't want to be seen as unfriendly because I think I'm pretty friendly, but I always have pangs of frustration when that happens, and it happens a lot. So it's a big bugbear for me. Sometimes when I'm in a queue, particularly at work, because I assume I know a lot of people and a lot of people know me, I'll be standing in the queue waiting for a coffee or getting ready to order a coffee, and someone in front of me will smile and put their hand up, and I'll think, someone's going to say hello to me. But as I start to smile and get ready to respond, I realise they're actually talking to someone behind me, and that is embarrassing. So missing subtle visual cues. And I understand that about 95% of human communication is visual. So this is going to happen a lot. And ultimately it causes a lot of anxiety and cringe and frustration. A big barrier, missing visual cues. I realised a long time ago that a very important resource that I have that helps me with my low vision is my memory and my familiarity with my environment. I can go into the city, to the Perth CBD on the train and navigate that environment very easily. Now, reason being is it's very neatly set out and predictable, but I know it like the back of my hand from experience, so I can utilise that. It's almost like drawing on a database, and by doing that, it's almost like going on autopilot. I don't have to use so much energy and brain power to navigate that scene. Recently, an example happened that made me realise how important this is. In the street that leads from our place to our local cafe, about a 3-minute walk, there were 4 houses being built. And during that time, what was normally a very simple, predictable, safe route along the footpath was disrupted. There were huge chunks of the old footpath stacked next to the footpath. The footpath was replaced, so it was out of action for a while. so that the concrete could dry. There were bollards, there was safety tape, there was no clearly marked route for pedestrians. And at one point I had to walk on the edge of the road, partly to get to where I wanted to go. And at that point I realised how much extra time it took me to get to where I wanted to go, and how much extra thinking and plotting and scanning and that I need, and brain power that I needed to use to get to where I wanted to go. Lisa and I went to Bali earlier this year, and I was also reminded of the importance of memory and familiarity while we were there, because the roads in Ubud were unpredictable. They were chaotic and messy. Footpaths had potholes. There were open drains this big on the edge of the road, so I had to tread warily for the whole time, and it took a lot of extra brain power. So memory, familiarity are a huge, huge asset and resource to help me with my low vision. Accessing print communication has been a difficulty for me since I was about 5, and that was when I started to learn how to read and write. I've tried to at least part depend on my own handwriting, but that has been very difficult, and I certainly have trouble reading other people's handwriting. As I've gotten older, my handwriting has just deteriorated. At work recently, the hospital rolled out what they call the digital medical record. Now, traditionally, we had medical files that were thick. They were often in several volumes. They were mostly never where they were supposed to be, and trying to read through them was difficult because they were often out of order and messy. There was a lot of handwritten notes, and I'd have to often try and decipher every maybe third or fourth word to try and work out the message of the author, and that was really not good enough. The digital medical record enabled us to enter our stuff via our keyboard at our computers at our leisure, and at the press of a button I was able to search up and find other people's notes. Overnight, game changer, problem solver for me. Technology has actually been my very good friend over the years. Back in the late 90s, my local low vision service helped me with software that would enlarge content on the computer screen. That was okay, a bit clunky and sort of not so streamlined and convenient. But what I've realised is that that functionality of being able to enlarge portions of a screen or enlarge fonts of a screen has now become integrated as mainstream in phones, tablets and computers. And because it's mainstream, it's streamlined and very efficient and easy to use. About 10 years ago, and I really enjoy reading, but reading has always been very hard work for me, I discovered the Kindle. Now, the Kindle is one of a number of tablet readers, e-readers, and it enabled me to read with ease. It helped me because of the size of the print, but it also helped me in other ways as well. When I used to read a novel, a paper novel, I'd have to squint through my magnifying glass. It would be uncomfortable on my shoulders and my back and my arms and my wrists and my eyes. It was really hard work. But also I would feel self-conscious if I was on the train or in a cafe that I was this guy squinting up at a book with his nose almost against the page. But now I can discard the magnifying glass. I can increase the size of the Kindle to 24 point, and I can effortlessly and comfortably read my novel. And I can also feel like I blend in and I'm not presenting as as an unusual sight reading my novel with my magnifying glass. So technology has been my incredible friend over the years. Another thing is with my smartphone. If I'm in a restaurant with overhead menus, I can take a photo with my phone, zoom in, and then sort of step back and effortlessly look at what's on the menu and make my selection. Whereas before I'd have to ask people, and often people would look at me and say, well, why are you asking me what's on the menu? Because the menu's overhead. I didn't want to have to explain myself, but I'd have to explain myself. Otherwise I'd look like I was some sort of idiot. That was the look on people's faces anyway. Yeah. Speaking of technology, it has surpassed print communication. It's helped me in so many other ways that I would never have thought of. My hobby is photography, and I've always had trouble. I always used to have trouble with focusing. Back in the 80s, cameras were equipped and evolved with incredible autofocus. And what that did was, and what it still does is, it's the one single visual factor that enables me to fully access my hobby with satisfaction and success. More about my photography hobby later on. Enough about what I can't do. Let's have a look at what I can do. By far, the thing in life that I am, and I'm pleased to say, that I am most proud of and in awe of is my marriage and my family. I love my marriage, love my wife. Lisa and I, Lisa's a social worker like me, so we understand each other. We've been married for nearly 30 years. That's a great achievement. We have made 4 amazing kids. Kind, smart, compassionate, funny. Our kids are incredible. Grace, Sam, Nick and Ella. I have been a professional social worker for 35 years. In my current job, I've been working for 23 years. I graduated from Curtin University with a Bachelor of Social Work, and some years later, I graduated from Edith Cowan University with a Graduate Diploma of Arts in Counselling. During my career, I've worked in a range of places. I worked in a low vision service. I worked in a cerebral palsy service. I worked in a service providing services for people with an intellectual disability. I did child protection work for just under a year, and then I moved to my current job, which is as a medical social worker in a large paediatric hospital. And that job has also largely been work with a disability focus. So I have gained a lot of skills, knowledge and experience in the disability field, and the amazing gift from that is that it's helped me to understand and navigate my own disability experience and to make sense of the complex disability world. While I was working at the Child Protection Service, and this is a highlight of my career, I met Lisa, my wife, who was also a social worker. My work has been incredibly rewarding, and that is a very, very fortunate thing in life, to have meaningful and rewarding work. I've been honoured to be able to provide advocacy and counselling and representation and support and education to people, to help them to maximise their potential and to build stronger engagements with their community. And a lot of these people that I've worked with have been marginalised and highly at risk of missing out. So 35 years on, and I look back with amazing pride and fondness. My photography genre of choice is street and urban photography. I love nothing more than to immerse myself in an urban or a cityscape, which can sometimes at first sight be ugly, chaotic, cluttered, and maybe overwhelming, and sometimes a bit scary. But my goal is to be able to pick the eyes out of it and find the extraordinary in the ordinary, the beauty in the mundane. I'm hooked. I love photography. When I was little, Mum and Dad had 2 photo albums, a green one and a red one. Both had black paper pages. Inside the albums were their collection of tiny square and rectangle black and white prints, white borders stuck in with old-fashioned photo corners. And I was captivated. When I was 10, I got this for Christmas. My first camera, the Kodak Instamatic 104. Terrible camera. Fixed lens, fixed focus, which never had a sharp point. Whether you're close, whether you're far away, it was not sharp. It was, in fact, noticeably blurry. And there was no settings on the camera. The only setting there was the shutter button. And I used this quite a lot when I was younger, but it was pretty frustrating. Still have it. It's a prized possession, my first camera. My grandfather was also interested in photography. Now I have his how-to, his textbook, a Kodak publication called How to Make Good Pictures, the Kodak Manual for Amateur Photographers. And the byline in the front of the book reads, "The book for everyone with a camera." Prized possession as well. When I was in high school, I wanted to do one of the photography electives, and I managed to jag it for one semester in 1975 in year 10. And I was introduced to a fully functioning darkroom. I also have the textbook for that course as well. It's called Photography. It's a 1971 publication. It costs $1.95. It reflects my interest in photography at that time, and that's another prized possession. When I left school, I was able to enrol in a proper photography course, a diploma of photography. I was busting out of my skin to follow my dreams, passionate about engaging, embracing photography. I managed to get into this course, low vision and all. That was a struggle because there are barriers. There were barriers. I had trouble with focusing. I could focus, but getting pin-sharp accuracy was a bit of a hit and miss affair. I felt quite weird about that, but I tried, I persevered. Now I still have the textbook for that course as well. Basic Photography by M.J. Langford, 1977 edition. It's described as a primer for professionals, which is exactly what it is. So the course, I only completed 2 years of the 3-year course, didn't graduate with a diploma. I couldn't get my head around the chemistry or the physics part of the course because I couldn't read the blackboard. But that was okay because really I'd learnt everything that I needed to learn. Back in the day, My 16-year-old brain, 17-year-old brain, soaked it all up like a sponge. It was a perfect example of being able to have your cake and eat it too. And I've carried that with me as a gift to this day, my knowledge of photography. In 1860, P.T. Barnum was in Amsterdam. Now, P.T. Barnum is known to us as the man who started the Barnum and Bailey Circus and Ringling Brothers Circus. He was a professional showman. He had a museum in New York called the Museum of Natural History. Now, while he was in Amsterdam, he met a man called Rudolph Lucchese. Rudolph Lucchese had albinism, and interestingly enough, so did his wife and kids. Now, he employed the Lucchese family to come back to New York with him and to work as exhibits in his Museum of Natural History, to work as human curiosities, to work in his freak show. Now, they were billed as natives from black heritage with white skin from Madagascar. During their show, they wore animal skins, and Rudolph Lucchese had incredibly bushy long hair and a long beard. And they were billed as having pure white skin, silky hair, and pink eyes that glowed and stayed open while they were asleep. Interesting part of history. The idea of people with disabilities being in freak shows is abhorrent to us today. But it's interesting to look at stories like that because it shows the beginnings of how some of the myths and stereotypes and some of the ideas still subtly linger today, but it shows how those ideas have been formed and how they've developed over time. Fortunately, we live in a more tolerant world and a more informed world. In 1978, I went and saw a movie. And I went and saw this film called Foul Play. Didn't know anything about it, had seen lots of films. It was just one of those films that we hadn't seen yet. So went in there. Now the film, it's Chevy Chase and Goldie Hawn and Burgess Meredith, who played the Penguin in the Batman series in the 60s. Now the story, it probably reflects how bad the film was. There was a plot by some bad guys to assassinate the Pope. Now, Goldie Hawn's character uncovered the plot, and the bad guys were on a mission to knock her off, to kill her. Anyway, the thing about the film was they used some pretty standard writing techniques where they used people with disabilities in comedy roles, objects of ridicule, objects of dread. And in the film, there was a guy who didn't speak. He was a bit of a psychopath killer, and he was a bloke with albinism called Whitey Jackson. Anyway, there was also a dwarf in the film as well, of course, just to sort of emphasise the point. There was also a bit of racial stereotyping in there, and sexism. This film had it all. So at the end of the film, I'm in the cinema, and I am feeling mortified. If Scotty could have beamed me up, I would have said, Scotty beam me up, but I slunk out of that cinema feeling incredible shame and embarrassment. And more recently, I think back on that, and I think how using people with disabilities in those kind of roles in films, and particularly people with albinism, is a It's pretty lazy writing, and what it does, it actually reinforces negative stereotypes. Back in the year 2000, the internet was still new and unfolding. It was certainly new to me. I had turned 40 that year, and I was determined not to be left out and left behind. So what I did was to set myself the goal of creating a web page. And I did. It was called Rob McCrill's Website. Who would have thought? It was my story about being born and living with albinism and low vision. Attached to the website was a blog, which we called a message board back then. And for the next 3 or 4 years, I had a wonderful experience of connecting with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people with albinism and their families all around the world. Messages, conversations, and connections. Earlier this year, on my birthday, I received a lot of messages from well-wishers wishing me a happy birthday. Among the messages was this one, which I'm going to read to you. Hi Rob, happy birthday to you. I always remember you as you were the first person with albinism I knew about through the internet. I was 13 years old when I found your blog for the first time. The internet was still a new thing in those years. I was so happy to read the story about another person with albinism like me. Now I'm 37 and I live in Brisbane, which is in north-eastern Australia. I'm originally from Colombia in South America. When I was 13, I never imagined being in Australia sometime. Now I'm here. I hope to meet you in person one day. I have mixed feelings about the internet. It can be a scary place. However, it can also be a magic place to connect people from all around the world, particularly people like us who are rare and who may be socially isolated. And this message is one of the reasons why I'm sitting here today speaking with you. When I was in my 40s and my 50s, and being a man with low vision and albinism, I needed to use a lot of public transport to get to where I wanted to go and where I needed to go. My kids still have fond memories of us heading out on a Saturday morning, jumping on the train near our home and heading into the city for muffins and milkshakes. Every now and then, and this probably happened about half a dozen times, so it wasn't really that horrific, but it was annoying. A well-meaning, chatty, busybody would approach my kids on the train or in the cafe and they'd ask, "So kids, are you spending the day with Grandpa?" Anyway, I would cringe. My eldest daughter, Grace, still remembers that and still gets angry when she remembers these chatty busybodies. That always was a good story to take home and share with Lisa. But I never really thought too much more about it. I was polite. I wished they would quickly go away because it was embarrassing and annoying. But anyway, recently I've noticed, being 64, that there's been a change. Now, when I explain to people these days that I have albinism, maybe it's my imagination, but they seem more surprised and more incredulous. And it kind of makes sense because having white hair and not much hair and being 64 kind of goes together. So maybe my albinism is more invisible, maybe more ambiguous these days. And that's confronting in a way because it's just yet another change, another life change, developmental life change for me as a person with a disability. Now, I kind of thought about this but never expected it to be, when it came, it was a surprise. So really yet another major life change and my first experience as a person with albinism who's getting older. Recently, my ophthalmologist informed me that I have the very beginnings of cataracts, which is interesting because it's my first eye complaint that is just related to aging and not related to albinism. Life is full of surprises. So what does the future hold for me? Well, sitting here, I'm thinking that life still feels like a great unfolding adventure. Right now, I am planning on having my first photography exhibition. My good old friend Mark, has just opened a picture framing business in Bridgetown, the town where he lives in the southwest of WA. And we have organised for me to display 25 of my favourite street and urban photographs in his little gallery attached to his business. And we've been working on this for a while. He's framed all of my pictures for me and they look beautiful. And we're having the opening to my exhibition, which is called A Trick of the Light, and that'll be opening soon, very soon.
So, here I am, the eldest and only white-haired child of my dark-haired parents. I started my life feeling totally isolated in my albinism. This led me to drawing the conclusion early on that I was defective and worthless. These days, talking about my albinism no longer sticks in my throat, filling me with shame and embarrassment like it once did. The A word doesn't feel like a swear word like it did when I was a kid. My albinism has at times been traumatic, causing me a lot of uncertainty, humiliation, exhaustion and frustration. My low vision and albinism still create barriers and headaches for me, and I know that they always will. I still experience recurring and ongoing grief about not being able to drive a motor car. I've developed some pretty effective resilience over time, and I've become very good at finding creative and innovative ways to adapt to the barriers that life throws my way. Think about this. I'm a legally blind man who takes photographs for a hobby, and I've just made my first movie. I was talking with someone recently about the notion of radical acceptance. My favourite quote says it nicely. It's from Popeye the Sailor, who said, "I am what I am." The notion of radical acceptance really makes a lot of sense to me. I like who I am, and I'm proud of my life and the unique course that it's taken. I am not defective and I am not worthless. I now live with my albinism and low vision with greater understanding, confidence, self-acceptance, self-compassion, and peace.
Thank you for letting me share my personal story and my unique experience as a person with low vision and albinism. It's been a hell of a ride. Also, I'm very pleased to offer this as my contribution to ongoing worldwide conversations about albinism. I'm not walking off into the sunset, I'm walking off into the sunrise.